Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Minnesota Senate Republican Minority Leader Mark Johnson. Senator, thanks so much for joining me.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it is a pleasure, and I'm glad you're on again because you can provide some insight for what everyone will be watching tonight, which is the vice presidential debate, the first and possibly only between Ohio Senator JD Vance and your state's governor, Tim Walz. As someone who represents Minnesota, who's worked with the governor, do you have any insight into what Americans will see on stage tonight?
Sure. So I think that's a great question on top of everybody's mind right now is who is Tim Walz? And, from being here in Minnesota and working with him over the last few years, what you see is a guy who is really a political chameleon. When he represented CD1, which is a very conservative district in Congress, he was NRA endorsed, and he did, a lot of those more kind of neutral bipartisan bills when he was there. But then he got into the governor's office, and he really took a hard left. He knew that that was his path to the governor's office, and you saw a number of things come out that were just incredibly radical on the left-hand side. And I think that's the groove that he's going to stay in going forward. And I hope once Senator Vance gets an opportunity to really poke at that record and show exactly what Governor Walz has done in Minnesota since he's gotten to power, it will really be eye-opening for a lot of people across the country.
What specifically about that record would you like on the national stage tonight? Because I was able to speak with you a few months ago and you said a similar sentiment. I've also talked to a Republican lawmaker, a former member of Congress who worked with Governor Walz while he was in Congress. He said, hey, I was able to work with him across party lines, across the aisle. You're saying that's not the case. So talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's, once he got in there, they've got the trifecta. So Democrats run both the Senate, the House, and then also, of course, the governor's office. He has not allowed Republicans to be part of that discussion at all. I've just looking through my text messages with Governor Walz, and I have two text messages from last session. I'm the leader of the Senate Republicans, and we have one seat difference between us and the Democrats. You think we'd be building relationships. He is not about relationships. He's about pure power and how that works. And so that's something that, maybe in Congress he had to work across the aisle at one point. But once he got the reins of power, he completely cut off the opposition in any meaningful way. And he does not build those relationships. So it's going to be difficult for him to move forward other than with just Democrats. If you're a Democrat liberal, he'll work with you. If you're conservative or Republican, he's not going to work with you.
You're the minority leader in the state's Senate. So you're saying you don't really have a relationship with the governor.
That's what I'm saying. I have reached out several times to him, his office, and there has been very, very little back and forth with us. In fact, towards the end of the last session, when there was a possible deal that we could get done at the end of session, they used tricks and they did some very, kind of mean-spirited things behind the scenes just to really make sure that we weren't part of that process. And so, for us, politics, yes, it's a game where you win, you lose, but they play in a way that really ruins the opportunity for bipartisan work in a way that will help all Minnesotans. And I'm afraid that if he gets into that vice presidential seat, that he'll run politics in the U.S. the same way.
Talk to us a little bit about that story. What was that deal? What were those tricks? How was Governor Walz involved from your perspective?
From my perspective, so we had given several offers over to the House and the Senate leadership. The governor was involved with those, including on those, but it got down to the last weekend. And we thought we got an invitation then to go to the governor's conference room to talk about the possibility of coming up with a compromise. When we got there, both me and the minority leader from the House, we quickly realized that they didn't really want to talk about policy compromise, anything meaningful or substantive. What we realized that we were led into a trap in his conference room while things were going on the floor in both the House and the Senate, that because the margins were so close, they had to get a couple people off the floor. And so they did this under the pretense of getting some compromise. So there was, yeah, I mean, this is the type of politics the governor and his leadership will play.
That's interesting to hear. It's alarming to hear. Did you ask them? Did you ask Governor Walz to his face, hey, what was that about? Did he have a response? Did his office say anything? Or did other Democrats say anything? Did they agree with you? What did that conversation look like?
Yeah, they've had very little conversation with us since the end of session. They've been focused on their elections and different things. And so this was just, from their perspective, I'm sure it was fair game. And for us, we felt that really ruined the opportunities for bipartisan compromise and ability to do that. I don't think Minnesotans, I don't think Americans would expect that type of politics, but that's the type of politicians they are.
If you were advising Senator JD Vance right now, I know a congressman from your state, Tom Emmer, he's playing Walz in that debate prep. What would you say to him? If you were in that room, what would that look like?
Well, I think there would be two things. Number one, Senator Vance really has to give Americans a vision of what the Trump administration is going to be doing going forward. And he does a great job of that. He'll be able to articulate that, and that's really a big thing. Is making sure that gives us some hope to Americans. And then the second thing is just to expose Governor Walz's record. Walz in Minnesota has been protected by the media. So not even a lot of Minnesotans realize the amount of taxes he's raised, the $18 billion of surplus that they've wasted over the last couple of years, the fraud that's gone on in the state, the fact that our students are at 50% or lower in proficiency in reading and math, and they promised all these great, big, grandiose things, spent all this money, and yet results are going down, down, down for our students. So I hope JD, and I know Representative Emmer will do a great job in preparing him and making sure that happens. That's a couple of things that I hope he does. And quite frankly, from what I've seen of Governor Walz, when pushed on his record, on the actual facts of his record, he can get pretty testy. And so that'll be an interesting debate. If he does lose his cool, it will be an opportunity for Senator Vance to get in there and really poke in at those issues.
I was talking with Congresswoman Fishbach yesterday about the debate, and she said a very similar thing. When pushed, he can be agitated. You're saying he's a political chameleon, but Americans who across the country, voters, are saying that he has a higher favorability rating. They like him better than JD Vance, and that's by double digits. So A, does that concern you? And B, how important is it for JD Vance to be likable or more likable tonight?
I think, the likability aspect, I suppose that can measure several different things. I think what you're going to see from Walz is more of a non-substantive, more of like what we saw at the DNC convention. We're going to hear stories, we're going to hear anecdotes, things like that going forward. I hope JD comes across, and I'm sure he will, in a way where it shows a level of competency and strength, a stability. Because I think Governor Walz, when he gets off on these stories, you kind of start questioning, well, do you really have a vision for this country? Whereas I think Senator Vance and former President Trump can give that vision of strength, of prosperity, of those things that families really can gravitate towards. And so we'll see what that looks like tonight. But I think Senator Vance will do a good job.
I'm sure tonight they will both be pushed on past commentary. Senator Vance has been critical of Donald Trump in the past. In 2020, according to the Washington Post, he wrote that the former president, quote, thoroughly failed, and he predicted he would probably lose the 2020 election. That was obviously before it happened. So if he is pushed on past comments where he is critical of the former president, how do you think he should respond?
Boy, that's a question that I haven't thought much about, but it's interesting. You have an idea of who Donald Trump is, but you get an opportunity to meet him in person, and you might do a little sidebar, whatever. He's a completely different guy behind the scenes than he is in front of a camera. And I'm sure that once JD or Senator Vance got to see that side of him, understood the theories, understood the ideas, what really motivated President Trump, I think he probably changed his story quite a bit, but it'll be interesting to see how he comes back on that particular issue, because I think a lot of us are curious.
And when it comes to the issues that matter to Americans, the Trump Vance ticket is ahead in polls when it comes to issues like immigration, like the economy, like inflation. When it comes to abortion and women's rights, though, Harris and Walz are leading by double digits in certain polls when it comes to that. As you know, Vance has made some comments about women that they have taken offense to. The childless cat ladies comment, as we know, has been a rallying cry of the left, but there are other comments. He said it doesn't make sense for Democrats who are, quote, childless cat ladies. He's also commented on people who don't have children. So how does he win over women tonight? Because as we know, when every vote matters in this race, that's a really important demographic.
Yeah, I think he can talk a lot about safety. He can talk about what's happening in our suburbs. He can talk about what's happening in our schools. I think he can talk about the costs, the economic impact of the Biden-Harris administration and what they have done to us. And same with Walz and what he's done to drive up costs for families. There's a lot of things that they can be talking about that I think will resonate with women, that are issues that affect their children, that affect their families, that affect them personally. So yes, I know there's been things that have been said, but at the same time, I think what his message is substantive, the things that are really important to people, not these distractions that have gone off, kind of off the cuff comments that probably should be looked at in the light of what are his actual substantive policies. And I think most people can get behind that.
We're going to see both of these men tonight on the stage, both reintroducing themselves to the country. They're both going to arguably probably be leaning on their Midwestern roots. But to you, as a Republican, what does a win look like for Senator Vance?
I think for most people, I think he's kind of introducing himself in a way that he's a younger guy, so he's got to make sure that he shows that level of competency, authority that he can take over. Something happened to President Trump, and we've seen a number of situations where he's come very close to something happening. Is JD Vance going to be able to take over the reins? And he really has to audition tonight to show that he has that ability. And I think, I'm sold. I've got to meet Senator Vance before and read his books and whatnot. I really feel comfortable with that. But he's got to bring that message to the American public, and I think he'll do a good job of that. Governor Walz, on the other hand, we had all these assassination attempts now on Trump, on former President Trump. And even within his administration, on Walz's administration, he has an employee that's made these inflammatory comments about that, and yet he won't address those issues, those needs, that assassination attempt. And so, I think what you're going to see is a more radical Walz, and I hope Senator Vance will be able to really point that out and show we don't need extremism. We just need somebody that's competent, strong, that's able to run this country in a way that makes people proud. And so, yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Senator Johnson, I appreciate you coming back on and joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
You bet. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.